Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this very important webinar that today we have organized. And this is a webinar that has been collectively organized by Justice for All and Muslim Network TV. Now, Justice for All has been doing human rights work, not just in any, you speak about Palestine, you speak about Kashmir, you speak about the Muslims in India who are right now experiencing fascism and Hindutva supremacy living in India. Justice for All has been there. But one important cause that Justice for All has given equal attention to, if not more, is the story of the Rohingya people, the people who many of us have not heard about, whose lives we don't know about, and who we do not talk about enough. The Rohingya people have been living a life of displacement, a life of homelessness, a life of banishment for a long time, and yet they are a forgotten people. I myself am from Kashmir, and I remember meeting Rohingya people who, escaping the persecution that the state inflicted on them, took refuge in Kashmir. And many of them, even today, to this date, continue to live in the occupied state of Jammu and Kashmir. But recently, the Indian state also deported many of them back to what they call Myanmar, and they were handed over to the government there. So, as an oppressed Kashmiri myself, we have had experiences of being close to the Rohingya people, and we have seen the difficult conditions in which they continue to live their life. So, today, in order to highlight what they are going through in the present and the human cost of the displacement that the Rohingya people have been experiencing, we brought in a guest. And this guest is not somebody who merely has read about the Rohingya people, who merely has, you know, written about them, but this is somebody who has lived amongst them, has done her work with them, and has seen and has been a witness to the difficult conditions, the, if we could say, uninhabitable condition in which they continue to live their life. Today we have Aisha Ghazi with us. Aisha Ghazi is a prominent lawyer and a documentary filmmaker specializing in human rights and civil liberties. And as the director of her organization called I Resist, she leads efforts in human rights advocacy through documentary filmmaking and welfare work, particularly focusing on refugees, victims of war and conflict, and stateless populations. And as we all know, stateless populations are really the populations that oftentimes are subjected to an erasure because there is no one to talk about them. And her documentary on life in Rohingya refugee camps called The Most Unwanted, which is very, though painful, but also at the same time very accurately titled, documents the difficult conditions in which the Rohingya people live. So thank you so much, Sister Aisha, for joining us today in this conversation.
Thank you for sharing your platform with me.
So if I could jump right into it, um, you have not just worked with the Rohingya people, you have worked with, or at least have documented the lives of Palestinian refugees in Jordan and Egypt, and you have a keen eye on the Syrian and Iraqi refugees in France and also the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Now, before we go into the specifics of the Rohingya question, what inspired you to use documentary filmmaking as a tool for human rights advocacy? Because people tend to do human rights advocacy in a wide variety of ways. So, why did you choose documentary filmmaking as the way to document the plight of these forgotten people?
That's a very good question. See, by default setting, I'm a writer, and that's what I had been doing for a long time. If you know, my academic background is very different from all this work, but in all with all my academic work and everything, one thing had been consistent in my life that I had been writing about all these issues. I don't even remember when in my childhood when I wrote first poem about Kashmir. I don't even remember how, I was a very small girl, and I still remember in my primary school I was invited by the teacher and she asked me to read my poem to the children about Kashmir. So I had been in this sort of human rights activism since it is in my default setting, I would say. But how did I come to the documentary? Because I realized after a long time when I had a chance that videos are more powerful expression than just words, obviously. Words have their own power, but when the words are expressed with with a video, with the visual of what you want to say, it's much more impactful, and people can engage with it more strongly because it creates empathy in some ways. And the second thing is words always obviously it is widely accepted by all psychologists around the world that human memory can retain the words. If they can retain the words 30%, the video format in the video format they can retain the memory in 60%, more than 70%. If I tell a tale to somebody, he will remember after 5 years. He will maybe recall 20% of it, or 30% of it. But video has a much more stronger impact. So what the work I'm doing is obviously to create an opinion and to create an empathy for the people who are forgotten, for the ideologies that are forgotten, for the narratives that are not allowed on mainstream media. That is my uh, focus of work. That is my main area of work. That I just choose the topics, the narratives, the ideologies, the people, the conflict, the side of the conflict, the other side of the stories that are not, you will not find on mainstream media. So, because I'm working as an individual, I would look for obviously more impact. How can I create more impact in my own work? So I think documentary was the right thing to do because
Right.
I tell that this person was saying this is different rather than that person telling himself that this is what happened to me.
Yeah.
So that's
So
why I
instead
chose
of
it.
so instead of you speaking for them, you're kind of passing on the mic to them,
Exactly.
letting them kind of narrate their own story. And obviously, I mean, it's undeniable that that has a greater impact whenever you hear it from the people themselves as opposed to reading it.
Mm,
And nowadays, people generally tend to prefer seeing things as opposed to reading
yes.
them for different reasons. But yeah, so when it comes to the Rohingya people, I mean, obviously, since the 1970s, these people have witnessed multiple crackdowns and multiple phases of repression that have forced hundreds of thousands to flee to places like Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries, but throughout South Asia as well.
Yeah.
And during such crackdowns, these refugees have often reported, human rights violations like rape, torture, and murder by Myanmar security forces. And in 2016, I remember the United Nations also stated that the government is carrying out a systematic ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya people. And we have had organizations like Human Rights Watch
Mm,
also asserting that there is a systemic campaign of ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya people.
yeah.
Now, you made this documentary and you called it The Most Unwanted. Now, before I ask you about the conditions in which the Rohingya people are living, tell us why you named it The Most Unwanted.
Because, this was the most appropriate term I could find for that. Obviously, when you name a documentary, you sit down and think what can represent the community you are talking about most accurately, that it can, give out the message just in one line. So the most unwanted people, obviously, if you see around, we see refugees. Like I belong to a refugee family in a way that in 1947 we have been uprooted from our lands where my fathers and forefathers and we had been living for generations in Punjab. And in 1947 we had been just on a few hours, not even few hours notice, just on a notice when we were attacked, we had to leave our homes and we walked. My forefathers, obviously my grandfather had to walk, and 3 months, or some people took 6 months, and they find refuge in Pakistani side of Punjab. They were refugees as well. because they came and they were obviously living in the refugee camps in Lahore and other places in Pakistan. But they were very much welcomed, obviously. And just in the generation's time, not even a generation, the generation that migrated from India, that was welcomed and they just adopted the new homeland. That was their homeland. That was the homeland that they created. And the people who are native to that homeland, they even accept them like it's Ansar and it's, Muhajirin and Ansar type of relation that was. And there was an overwhelming support from the native people as well. So they were not refugees anymore, just in the same generation, 10 years down the lane or something. But then when I compare it to the Rohingya people, look, I went to Bangladesh, I stayed there obviously in Cox's Bazar. If I see a Rohingya person and a Bengali person, I cannot make any, I cannot judge who is who. They look the same. They speak sort of the same language. It is just a little Naf river that is, flowing between them. At one point in the history, they were the same people. They were part of the same, obviously, country because those areas had been part of the same sort of setting. But you can't differentiate, but they know that, oh, this is beyond that, the river, that is Rohingya, and this is Bangla. This is Bengali. And just across there, some points in that river are so, they're easily crossable that people, although they are dipped in the water up to their neck, but they can cross from there. So that is the difference between them. But just as across the river, they step foot in the Bangladesh. They are the unwanted people because they are not welcome there. They are not needed there. For last many, many years, that is the only thing that they have realized that they are not welcome there. If I look at the refugee psychology, look, when they run from somewhere for their life, the first place where they take refuge, generally they are very much obviously they feel kind of an attachment to that because that is the place that is giving them a refuge and a hope for life. But if somebody is again taking a chance, like the Rohingya people are doing, they are taking chance in boats to go to Malaysia, to go to Indonesia, to go to other places. Nobody will do that unless they are the most unwanted people on the place where they are living. And the most unwanted in another way that they look the same, they speak sort of the same language. They are genetically, if we look at their gene pool, they are almost the same people, but still they are not accepted there as the people. They are, felt as a burden. All I know that Bangladeshi economy is not an ideal economy already, but the people who are already living in the poverty, even they believe that the new people who are coming, they are going to steal the resources. You don't have anything already, right? Nobody is going to steal any, nobody can steal anything from you because you don't have anything, right? Because look at the poverty level in there. And the people who they can steal from are not in their access anymore. And it's as I always say, the ethnicity, the refugees are a different ethnicity. Poverty is a different ethnicity. Whoever you are never welcomed anywhere. You are not part of any clan because people
Yeah,
don't see any prospects in you. So these are the people wherever they go to Malaysia, they are not welcomed. Some of them very recently had been handed over to our
yeah,
army, which is I cannot imagine anything more heinous than that. How can you do that? And from some other countries as well, they had been handed over back to their killers. So these are
yeah,
the most unwanted people. Wherever they are go, I don't see anywhere they are welcomed. Yes, to some exception, I have met Rohingya people in Pakistan, although they are not, some of them are not given citizenship so far, but they are living in much better conditions. But because there is a general trend around the globe that nothing positive about Pakistan should be said because there can nothing positive can be there in Pakistan. But this is what I, witnessed myself. I went to Karachi in Ibrahim Hadri side, the fishery side. There are Rohingya, they live there, and there are some. There is a whole belt of Rohingyas, and they are not living an ideal life, but they are not going through what Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh are going through, obviously. And then I think 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, Pakistan signed another agreement with Saudi Arabia that they will be giving some citizenship to some
yeah.
Rohingyas as well. So,
Yeah.
except Pakistan is kind of an exception in so many ways, but generally they are not welcomed anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so interesting what you said when you were talking about it, when you said that you consider, in some ways, the refugees to be a different
It is.
ethnicity.
It is.
And I think that's a very accurate way of putting it because they are they're just seen as the outsiders, as people who don't belong. And as you rightly said, I mean, it's not really taken into consideration as to how similar they look or how whether they speak the same language. They are still perceived as outsiders, as people who are, kind of stealing from you or occupying your spaces or taking what is yours. And I think that really is an accurate way of putting it, that these kind of um, realities are just pushed aside in order
But
to
you know,
enable
brother,
that.
if I
Yeah,
can add just one more thing in there,
yeah,
we
sure.
cannot really blame Bengalis for that solely because they are
Mm.
already they are not a very economically ideal country, not a very
Yeah,
strong people. If we compare that to UK and Europe and America, and the whole political campaigns are now based on hatred against immigrants.
yeah, absolutely.
So that is sort of the same psychology that, oh, people from some other land are coming in and they will steal your resources,
Yeah,
right?
we
So this
see
is the
that
same,
in the UK
exactly
as
same
well right now.
psychology, yeah, translated in another way, expressed in another way. But this is the
Yeah,
same human psychology that, oh, we are the settled people or new people are coming, they will be eating from my plate. So
yeah,
this is kind of the same thing.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that unfolding in the UK right now, and obviously Bangladesh is in a much difficult position comparatively if you speak from an economic standpoint. But yeah, at the end of the day, it boils down to, your psychological sense of how you ought to treat people who, obviously they're not coming to Bangladesh or Malaysia or any other place where they seek refuge because they want to. I mean, they don't really have a choice. I mean, they're not doing it because they want to, kind of prosper. They're just doing it because it's the only way they can kind of survive or continue to exist because their existence is made difficult in their own land. Otherwise, who would want to leave their own home? So I think that is something that usually is not remembered. So if we kind of now talk about the specifics of what you discovered or what you found out when you were in Bangladesh, kind of filming and spending your time with the Rohingya people. I saw the documentary on your website, and I mean, it just kind of attests to the truth that you said in the beginning that images really leave a strong impact on you. And what I found very fascinating was the smile of some of the Rohingya children. Um, Very similar to how we see right now the Palestinian children, for example, smiling despite the fact that they live in conditions where most of us as adults would not be able to survive a day. But somehow these beautiful human beings still manage to smile without romanticizing it, but just to kind of point out their humanity. So, can you describe the living conditions in the refugee camps based on what you observed while making your documentary? So, what are some of the bigger challenges that the Rohingya refugees face in their daily lives, such as access to food, healthcare, education, medicine, or things like these? So, what are their kind of everyday challenges?
This is, to be honest, this is so heartbreaking. When I went there in 2018, it was just a year ago, there was a lot of influx from in 2017. There was a big influx of refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh because it was a peak time for the genocide when they were wiping it out like villages after villages. Although the last year had been very significant as well, but nobody spoke about it, so nobody knows what happened last year. But in 2017, it was in the media attention, and all the cameras were there, all the big people, you know, was seen in there. So the media was following them, and because the media was following it, that because we could see it on the screens, a lot of aid was going in there. A lot of charities were working in there. You could see, some children going to school and some people queuing up for hours and hours and hours for getting, a little sack of flour, or there was the longest queue I have ever seen in my life for the medical camp. I wonder if you are not well and still you are, if you're still you're, happy to stand in a queue for 4 hours, 5 hours, how unwell you must be, and still you are standing there because you can't leave your space, and that is the only option you have got. So even if in 2018 I was thinking that it is impossible to provide these people with the basic necessities of life, because it's a huge population, obviously, it's a huge population. The state who has all the resources, they can't even provide everything to everyone in the system of, the system of state that we are living in, whatever you call it, democracy, whatever sort of things we are living with. They can't even provide everything to everyone. How can NGOs do it? NGOs, especially when NGOs are not responsible for everyone, they are just responsible for doing whatever we can do. And nobody is going to question them, why didn't you do this? Because they are not responsible for it. And they are not obviously able to provide everything to everyone. So in some of the refugee, obviously, camps, they are what they are doing. That was a jungle where they landed. So they were cutting the bamboos and they were very much trained in that certain skill, and they were making little huts for them, and they are given plastic by some NGOs and they make up their huts, and some could not even afford to make a door for themselves because they didn't have enough plastic. And I looked inside the refugee camps, many of their dwellings, what they had some sachets of food, hanging with the wall, some had some onions stacked in one side. So this kind of little things that NGOs provide, that is all they have. That is all they have. So now I wonder, when just 2 years ago, I think the US has cut its aid for Rohingya refugees in there, and so many other countries who are giving some aid to Bangladeshi government to provide help to these refugees, the aid has been cut. So what would be the condition now? Because when media is there, when camera is there, so many people want to perform. When media is not there, so many aid is already cut down. No, media, camera is shut, we are going. So what must be the condition now? I can't even imagine. So, and that is why wherever this sort of poverty is, comes to this point, there is, and then what takes over is the crime, because that is the only place where there is always a scope, where there is a hope for people. And that becomes the hunting ground for the criminals. Because if you know, very recently, there is a very big uh, hike in children kidnapping. There has always been a problem of women traffickers, people's trafficker, the human traffickers as well, because they buy people from there and they sell them as the domestic, so-called domestic help. But that is slavery. We know that's slavery. They are not going to be paid, we all know. And then there are the women are bought from there for very, very little money, because some people, because they want to give, the families want to give to human smugglers to find a hope, maybe to go to Malaysia or something, and they have to pay to the smugglers. So sometimes they sell the women. You know that these are the uh, less wanted human beings wherever in that sort of dwellings, obviously. For obvious reasons, we won't go into the reasons, but that is the situation. So what happens to those women? Sometimes they are sold in the name of marriage, sometimes they are sold as domestic workers, or sometimes they are just sold as sold. That's it. Whatever you label it. What happens to them, nobody talks about it because nobody wants to open the chapter. Who is going to open the chapter? Bangladesh government is not going to look into it because they have already so much to do. They are not the signatory of this and that, and they are still keeping refugees. They are not going to start another headache of human rights. So who will be doing that? Because most of the people who are around that are the beneficiaries. So there are layers and layers and layers of trauma, to be honest.
Yeah.
Layers and layers of, I would say, you can imagine, oh, these are the important things. They don't have this. But that is beyond that. That is much beyond that. That's not just about the food. That's not just about the shelter. That is beyond that. The trauma is just beyond that. And on top of that,
Right.
most of the community is, I would talk about adults, because children, as you said, they were smiling. They can manage to smile because they don't know the realities of life. But in adults, you will hardly find anybody smiling there because they know the reality of life. They know they don't have any hope. And secondly, they are still carrying the trauma of what they have seen in
Right.
2015 or before that. So all around you, it's a trauma. Everybody is traumatized. Everybody is carrying some scar, and it's normal for people because everybody has it. So they don't think it is something that they should be talking about.
Mm.
So, what can you imagine in that sort of what about human rights? What are human rights? You know,
Yeah, in some ways, it's, even human rights as a discourse sometimes is only available to the privileged. I
oh,
mean,
yeah.
obviously, even when we speak of human rights, there is a presupposition there that somebody has to provide you with these rights. I mean, it can't happen in a vacuum. So you can talk about human rights all you want, but if there is no entity that is actually there to bestow the human rights upon you, then as one of the scholars, Jewish scholars, Hannah Arendt, she spoke about this as to how human rights are intimately tied to state, and how therefore stateless people in some ways are expelled from the realm of humanity, because there is no state to kind of guarantee them their humanity. If you see this idea of being human, you tie it to you having certain rights. If you have no state, then you don't have any rights, so your very fundamental humanity in some ways is questioned. So if, I mean, building on this, if I may, so, as a population that is stateless, um, so what legal hurdles do the Rohingya people face in seeking safety or citizenship? So, rather, this, and if I may ask, building on this, in the places where the Rohingya people have kind of tried to seek refuge, be it Bangladesh or Malaysia, we know that recently Malaysia turned certain Rohingya refugees away, but in the places where they do exist, are there any prospects for them becoming citizens there, or them having some sense of legal rights or legal status, or are they really people who are in the legal sense not really, the law does not cater to them at all, so they're in this very lawless space where their existence is not even acknowledged per se.
Exactly what you said. Look, exactly what you said. Statelessness, it comes with depriving you of the right to claim human rights. That's
Mm,
exactly what you said, right? And this is the situation. And what are the basic human rights? What are the basic human rights are the food and education and right to life and freedom from torture. And these are the certain few things. Every single violation exists there. Every single violation. They don't have food, they don't have any security, they don't have any access to education, and they are tortured in so many ways, not just in one ways. As you might have seen the very recently in 2024, last year, and I think it was June, July, or October spell of killings of Rohingyas in Arakan. And what they did, that they were slaughtering people, they were not shooting them. I'm not talking about Myanmar army. Myanmar army had, employed so many other ways to kill because they were burning, so they can collectively burn people around and move on. And they were shooting people down, this sort of thing. Now, the bigger evil, rather, it is very difficult to find who is the bigger evil, but the Arakan army, they are, because they are not the state, they don't have that sort of flow of ammunition to them. They don't want to waste their bullets on them. So what they do, they just slaughter them or they just bury them alive. And this is what we have seen in what happened into the Bihari population or non-Bengali population in Bangladesh in 1971 as well. We witnessed that there was a very open saying that I'm not sure if you know about Al-Badr, those the people who were not in favor of Bangladesh. So there was a campaign that do not waste your bullets on it, just bury them alive. So this is exactly what's happening in Arakan as well. So this is the level and intensity of torture they are going through, and nobody is absolutely bothered about it. Nobody is bothered about it. Have you heard about it on any BBC, CNN, and anywhere? No, no, no. You won't find it anywhere, not even in on the local, our Asian or Muslim any news networks. It's not that. So that is the sort of torture they are going through. And then every other day there is a fire in the camps. And sometimes the fire is because of the way the camps are built. And sometimes it is started by the outsiders because they don't want them to be there. And whenever there is a fire, there is always a number of missing children. So just look at the trauma. Missing children. You don't know, a mother doesn't know if he was burnt alive or he was just kidnapped. So where is the child? And just multiply it to the number of women who have lost their children because they are already living with the minimum what they have got. So it doesn't it obviously it does matter for them what they lose in the form of whatever they had in the camp, but losing a child is the biggest thing that they are left with whenever there is a fire. So just imagine the trauma and the torture they are going through, and then when you talk about human rights. And on top of that, because they are stateless and they don't have any citizenship rights, I would say, because the law has been changed where they had been living for generations. Law had been changed 1980s. Okay, you're not a citizen of this country anymore. You're stateless. Right. So the new place where you're going, you had never had any claim over that land, so you're stateless. Okay, you are going to Malaysia. You don't have anything to do with us because even according to the refugee convention and this and that, wherever you take the first refuge, wherever you go as a refugee, you are supposed to get asylum there. You are not supposed to go to the next country. So if you are going to India, you know what happens there. They just snatch, I cannot forget that news. That's not just one news, there are many, many news that generally the Indian army comes and they just take away the parents and the little children are left in the dwellings there in Indian
Right.
side of this was a very common happening in there. So this is
Yeah.
what they are going through. And now because they are stateless, they don't have any right that they can go anywhere for justice because we
Mm.
don't have a right to go for justice. We don't get justice, right? In many, many places, the kind of justice system we have overall. We know that we are not going to get justice, but at least we have a right to justice. The
Yeah.
statelessness, deprives you of that right. You don't have a right to justice. You can't go anywhere. So you don't have any claim. So this is what they are battling with. And why would if one country is compelled to take the refugees and give them citizenship, it doesn't suit anyone because it will morally bound so many other countries. So there is a silent consensus that nobody
Consensus. Yeah.
is yes, nobody is going to offer that because if we compel them to offer it, we'll have to offer somebody. So this is what we have done to the world after making borders and borders. And border is a very new phenomenon anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just does not seem to make sense. I mean, the things that you pointed out about the river, I mean, kind of put this in conversation with, because I obviously speak about Kashmir because of my kind of personal belonging to it. Um, so I remember when I visited Muzaffarabad and the areas of Kashmir on the other side. It's fascinating how, I mean, the other side is just a stone distance of stone throw away. So, I mean, if you throw a stone, it's going to land on the other side. And the animals, many a times when they would graze and when they would they would actually many a times accidentally go over to the other side. And many a times, the Indian state has also detained animals, saying that, they are from the other side. I mean, the fact that the animals can't even, they take a wrong step and they are no longer kind of, and they're at a place where they're not supposed to be. So, I mean, we have seen this. You're absolutely right. I mean, this comes with this very abnormal kind of division of the world into these borders that do not many a times correspond to natural geographies, and that creates these very abnormal or counterintuitive divisions where you can look at the other side, but for some reason you can't just walk and go over there. Rather, you have to go through the entire web of bureaucracy, because apparently that is a different place, despite the fact that your river is really flowing through the same space, and you are under the same sky, and you there's absolutely no difference as such.
And that
So
is most heartbreaking
yeah,
when you go to Neelam Valley in Kashmir, Pakistani side of
yeah,
Kashmir, and you are sitting on a bench, just a little bench, and just across there, you can see the other side. And that
yeah,
little, river, you could not cross for 70 years. It's such
yeah,
long
absolutely. I
distance.
mean, but one thing that I would kind of compare this with the Rohingya people, because we're talking about them, is that I have spoken to refugees in Azad Kashmir, and rather, I recently did my undergrad thesis on it. And I spoke with them, and one thing that was, though obviously like any other people, the Kashmiri refugees in Muzaffarabad, when I spoke to them, like any other refugee population, I mean, they're living in camps, and camp life is a very difficult life, especially for people. Many of these are like nomadic people. If we keep that in mind, that when they were on the other side, they had, huge tracts of land that they would just, roam around.
Hmm.
And now they are kind of put in this small camp where they're constricted, and that is pretty much their world. So obviously that is a very difficult thing for them. But yes, they have difficulties. Yes, there are issues of health. Yes, there are issues of uh, you know hygiene and other things, and crowdedness. But when I spoke to these refugees, one thing all of them told me was that the people always welcomed them. And they always told me that when they first came, people emptied, if they had two portions in their house or two floors, they emptied one floor so as to accommodate these people. So yes, I mean, in terms of the state, and in terms of the provisions, and in terms of other uh, necessities of life, there are things that have to be done, but they are still kind of not, they don't have this experience that the Rohingya people do, where
100%.
wherever they
100%.
go, they are really not welcomed, and they are not made to feel like they have any claim to the land, or they are at their home. And obviously that is something that I mean, even in terms of refugees, you can see a certain hierarchy that is emerging, where some refugees still have it better than others. And I
Yeah.
think I would absolutely say this, that the Rohingya people in some ways are at the margin of the margins.
Yes.
So I mean, if you look at the refugee population, then you think of them as inhabiting this space that is at the margin. Then if there is a margin to this margin, then the Rohingya people really are living in that space.
You
So
are making a comparison between Pakistanis, Kashmiri refugees in Pakistan. We don't, they are refugees in some legal terms, but they are not refugees,
yeah,
refugees. And
yeah,
just about the people who are native to that land. Yeah, I've personally seen from the state of Pakistan the kind of acceptability they have, the kind of, the state have tried to facilitate them. It is exceptionally different from what I have seen all around the world. I have obviously been to so many refugee camps around the world, I would say. But for me, if I, look at it comparatively, they are in much better positions. No country in anywhere in the world is offering free gas and free electricity and free, piece of land to you that you live and you don't have to worry about anything and this and that. And there are, have you seen those the camps that are built in large patches of the land that are given
yeah, with the,
the refugees are with free electricity and free everything. So this is what I personally have never seen this sort of acceptability and treatment for any sort of refugees anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the
right,
world. This
right,
is something exception. As I said, because we are never keen about there is a global trend, not just regional. Not to talk about anything positive about Pakistan, but this is something exceptional that Pakistan is doing because
right,
Pakistan does not consider them refugees. Obviously, they are their own
right,
people. They are, and whatever the state on authorities do, this and that, this and that. Generally, there is a welcoming, rather an emotionally welcoming attitude from rest of the Pakistan for them. So this
yeah,
is something very different. There, you just cross the river, and you are the most unwanted people, the
mm,
Rohingyas. I would say the same thing about, like, I spent some time with Syrian refugees and Syrian, Iraqi, and Irani. All of them were mixed in Calais, in France, in Europe. The conditions that they were living in, I think Rohingyas were even better than them. I went
Mm,
in winter, it was January, and it was raining for last 2, 3 days. And all my feet were just in the mud. I had to, I had to, pull them out of the mud to walk along those paths. And people were living there in plastic tents. Just imagine.
mm.
If they step out
And
of their camp, they were in the mud. Miserable situation, trust me. Even the weather, harsh weather conditions and wet weather conditions make it even worse. And
yeah,
every other day there were obviously protests from the far right who didn't want them there. And then again it was a burning issues that they were burnt and this and that. So this is common. The misery is common around
yeah.
the whole refugee, life. It's the only thing that is common is misery and trauma.
So, so are there, like, when you spent your time among the refugees, Rohingya refugees? So obviously you took a lot of memories when you left. Um, so are there any like specific individuals or stories from the camps, some people who you remember or whose stories you remember that really kind of reveals the struggles of the Rohingya people? So any story, any person who comes to your mind, whose story you would want to share, so that people know that, while we talk about Palestine, while we talk about all different oppressed people of the world, and there is no comparison. I mean, these are different places, different stories, but also at the same time some overlaps. I mean, in terms of some human struggles that are shared across these places. So, are there any like specific individuals or stories that stood out to you that you would want to kind of share with us?
Certainly, certainly. I would highly recommend you to watch the last 6 minutes of the Most Unwanted documentary, because this is where, under the title of the filmmaker's diary, I have put some moments that were the moments that I can never ever forget. Like, I saw a funeral there. I have narrated it in the documentary as well. And trust me, we had been, obviously, it's a life. We see death every day, every other day. We experience it. We see it how it looks like. In every culture, every other culture, there is deaths obviously look different. But that's something that I could not imagine. How they are so much malnutrition. They are so thin that a funeral was passing beside me, and I could not even imagine that it's a funeral because the box was so small. I could not even imagine that a dead body can fit in there. And when somebody told me, oh, get aside, it's a funeral, I was shocked. There are just few people taking that man or woman or whoever, the most unwanted person, to occupy the land that they never offered to them, and then now they are going to occupy it for forever. So, and the body is so thin that they can fit in a very small box. I was really, really shocked, to be honest, because we people who are settled in the lands, we can't even imagine what the kind of suffering must be. Such a thin body, it was like it's just a skeleton that could fit in that box, and it was just unimaginable. And then I saw a little piece of paper. I have spoken about it in the documentary as well. And the child had drawn a little person with one amputated leg. And I was just thinking, look, oh, what this is a child who found a pen and a paper, and then this is what he's drawing. So this child has a natural tendency for art. That is why he is, wherever he found a piece of paper and something, he's trying to express what is in his mind, but he has never got a chance to talk about it because everybody is traumatized and everybody is going through the same, so it's not something different that a child, we need to listen to a child, oh, he has got something to tell. No, it's not like that. And a child with an artistic, I would say, nature, who wanted to express something in the form of art, how difficult it must be, because generally people with this sort of trend are much more sensitive than the other people. And when you have no way to express yourself, what you must be going through, and what shall we expect from these people What they don't have any hope. They don't know what they should dream of. Like my children dream of something, okay, this is what I want to be, or this is what I want
Yeah.
in my life. What should they be? And I can't imagine what they dream of. It is something very, very traumatizing. And the women, to be honest, what they have seen is the worst you can imagine or expect from life. The women, they have been through the worst, like going through the trauma of losing their loved ones, going through being assaulted physically, and then facing the same community which doesn't have acceptability for you, and then losing your own children, seeing them die in front of you. Like there was a lady who was saying that, I feel that my heart is burning. She had lost her child there because Myanmar army had thrown his child in the fire. And this is all because when the trauma is abundant, when there is so much trauma, people forget to speak. They don't
Yeah.
know how to express because it's a very natural phenomenon. This is a I would say this is the survivor's kit that people stop thinking about it, people stop expressing it, they don't want to open that window towards their feelings. So they just tend to be quiet and be, you know, mechanical sort of beings who are just there to explore the survival chances of any survival. So they just stop speaking about it. So if in that sort of situation, if a woman is saying that, expressing just one line, that my heart burns, with that memory, so you can imagine there is a fire in my heart. So you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say this, when it comes to the oppressors are always in arms with each other. I mean, I know this is not just about the Rohingya people, but this is definitely a truth that I feel more people, more of us should kind of realize is that the weapons that India uses against Kashmiris are manufactured in by firms that are Israeli. And there was recently a shell that was found in Gaza after the bombing, and that shell had written on it, "Made in India." And you have Rohingya people in Kashmir who are being ghettoized and then deported by the Indian state. And you have Kashmiris protesting for the Rohingya people and being sent to prison because they chose to protest for the Rohingya people. And I think more of us should realize how, if the oppressor is in arms, and how these different oppressive states have this kind of coming together, because all of them realize that in order for this entity to be able to, if they are able to continue their oppression, then only would we be able to continue it. So therefore we have to kind of cooperate with each other. I think it's so much more important that the oppressed also remain in conversation and develop a tangible solidarity, so that I feel that the Rohingya cause is my own, and obviously they also feel a sense of belonging towards Kashmiris and Palestinians and all the people of the world who are oppressed.
Hmm.
So we need to wrap up, but if you want to tell us in the last 2 minutes your own thoughts or something that you feel that the Rohingya people would want the world to know, and anything basically that you want to say yourself or you feel that they would have said if they were here right now.
Look, the most important bit at the moment, what Rohingya people would want is to let the world know that they exist. That is the most important thing. They exist, and most of the world doesn't even know that they exist. And this is the whole chunk of the global community that is going through all this. So even if you are going through the worst of the worst times, if it is being documented, if it is being written, if it is being noticed by some, there is a little, kind of, you can say, nobody can give you justice, but at least you know that it is accounted for. The crimes against you are accounted for. But then we have a whole community of Muslims, around 1 million or more than that, who don't exist for the world and they are going through the worst.
Yeah.
So there is no hope for them. There is no hope for them. The Rohingya boat is drowned, around 600 people die, and it doesn't make any news. That
Yeah.
is something horrific. I met a lady in Malaysia in Rohingya camps. They're not camps, they're not just, maybe they are not allowed to live in one certain area, so they are spread around. Kuala Lumpur also. I went there to one of their houses, and the lady had witnessed that trauma of, being transported in a boat to Malaysia, and see, she saw herself, so many people dying of hunger because, they had to get the chance to come to Malaysia, and they were waiting for the Malaysian army to let them in, or Coast Guard, or whoever they are. And then sea conditions are not always the same; they are uncertain, and
Yeah.
the times, it can later take a long time. So she saw so many people dying, and I was wondering about that lady. She was of my age. That what she must be thinking sitting there. That there are dead bodies in the same boat, and then there are some alive people who are half dead because there is no food, and they don't know when they are going to die, because you can't
Yeah.
kill them, you can't bring them back to life. And then she is a lady who is looking at all that, and what she must be, thinking about herself. So what
Yeah.
kind of trauma she must be going through, and what is she going to be in her whole life, even if she is given a good chance. So this kind of communities, even if they are given a good chance for life, they can never think about the whole community. They are the survivors, and survivors think about surviving. This is what happened in
Yeah.
1947 with Pakistanis, the people who migrated, obviously.
Yeah.
Most of them, all life, they just kept thinking about surviving. They didn't
Yeah.
think about the community, didn't think about making up the country. They just thought about surviving. So we have lost the whole community, to be honest.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, it was a very honest conversation, and I think it was not very tightly structured, but I think that was what made the conversation actually very honest and sincere, as opposed to it being, you know. So, thank you so much for speaking about the Rohingya people, and we would definitely share your documentary with on our different platforms so that other people also can watch it, and as they should watch it, because that's the least we can do. It's the weakest state of, iman or faith, is to at least feel a sense of restlessness within you about these stories and these people, because that's the least you can do. If you can do more, then you have to do more, but if you can't, then at least you ought to protect that sense of restlessness
So,
and anguish for these people, because that's at least the weakest state of faith. So I think that is something that we can take away at the end. Thank you again for joining, sharing
thank
your
you so much for
experience,
sharing your platform with me. It was very nice talking.
and it was very nice talking to you as well. And thanks to all the listeners as well who tuned in and who listened to the conversation. Remember the Rohingya people in your dua. Remember the people of Palestine in your dua. Remember the people of Kashmir in your dua.